Good afternoon. My name is Dale Rodriguez, and this is Flabonga Monthrothacube. With me today, I have Sabby Gill of Dext.
Hey
Hey,
there,
Sabby.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
All right, let's talk about the most important thing about Dext, the Dext hoodies. How is it they're so luscious, luxurious, and feel so good? What's the
I
secret?
know, you know what? It's the one thing I probably wear more than, and I think my family get tired of it as well because it's like, Dad, do you ever wash it? And it's like, well, yeah, it normally goes in at the end of the evening and I can pick it up the following morning. And I've got to make sure that people don't feel as if it's the same hoodie every single day, which it is, but that I haven't washed it in between. But these things are just great. They're so warm. I'm not exactly sure where we actually buy them from, but yeah, they're just. I think it's like three different layers all in there together, compacted. So it's quite fluffy and
Yeah,
stays
there's something about them
extremely
it's,
warm.
they're like a genuine premium good hoodie. And as
Yeah,
someone who receives a lot of merch and swag from vendors, I would say honestly, the Dex hoodies is top tier. It's in the top three of things to receive if you want some merchandise and you're a merch
cool.
hungry person. Get a Dex
So
hoodie. They're good.
top three on merchandise and software. That's great.
Software in fintech or software in the world?
Of course, I'm biased, so I'd go for the world, but definitely within the bookkeeping automation platform space that we operate in.
Okay. All right. Would you like a silly question or a serious business like question?
Let's start silly.
Okay. I'll ask you one of my generic ones. If you were a biscuit, what kind of biscuit would you be that accurately portrays your personality and why? But don't just pick your favorite biscuit.
I would probably go with a fig,
A
right?
fig.
A fig roll.
Okay.
So I think it's probably one of those. It's a bit like Marmite, right? You either love it or you hate it.
Mm,
And for me, it's a great dunker as well, right?
okay.
Especially when it comes to tea. And if you grab it just before the outer skin sort of falls out, otherwise you end up with fig tea. But to me, that's probably my go-to biscuit.
Okay. Okay. I mean, questionable if it is actually a biscuit. And for our American viewers, that's a fig Newton, by the way. They call them fig Newtons in America.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Any Americans watching in the chat will be great. Thank you. Okay, let's go for another silly question. Okay, you can only eat one meat for the rest of your life. I'm assuming you're a meat eater. Um, Once you've chosen that meat, you can't have any others. What meat are you choosing?
I would choose chicken, right? And I think it's probably because it's the most healthiest. Because of religious purposes, I don't actually eat beef, and I never have done through my entire life. I'm a Sikh, and sort of respect that from a cultural perspective through my parents and everything else, and been brought up that way. So yeah, to me, it's chicken.
Okay, I don't want to. So you've never tasted beef before, not even by
Never.
mistake,
Never. Well, look, I've never. The thing I would say is
knowingly.
I've never knowingly yet eaten beef, right? And I'm sure there's been some times where, and I always have this recollection being back at school. And I went to a boarding school where
Mm.
sometimes I'd be given a plate of food and I was told it was a different meat, and I'm sitting next to a person who's eating exactly the same thing, and I'm looking at it, and there's no difference between the two. So sometimes I'm not sure if it was a shortcut, but even in those instances, I wouldn't eat it, right? Just on the basis that it might be. So yeah, look, I would never knowingly eat it. No.
Okay. I mean, as someone who does like beef, you're missing out. You're missing out a lot, right? But I
Yeah,
respect your religion and your faith because that's cool.
yeah,
You just said you went to a boarding school. I didn't know that about you.
yeah.
What was that like?
Actually, do you know it was a Quaker school as well, right? So the
What?
ethos,
So a different religion entirely.
totally different religion as well. It was back in the early 80s, and I think I was one of the very first Asian people to foreigners ever to go to that school, and it was actually based here in Reading,
Hmm.
which is where I live. And interestingly enough, my both my kids, my 18-year-old daughter who's just left school, and my 16-year-old son, both of them go to the same school that
Oh
I've gone
wow.
to. Um, so it was quite interesting going back for the induction and bumping into the head of year who used to be my sports teacher.
Oh
Um,
wow. That's amazing.
yeah,
So some of your teachers are still actually there. That's crazy.
yeah, he's just retired, so he's been there for like 45 years as a teacher,
Whoa.
sports teacher, geography teacher, and now he was head of year. Um, but he kept on sharing stories, and I'm surprised he had that good a memory of ski trips and that sort of stuff, where maybe I probably got into a little bit more trouble than I probably should have done at that age. But
You
that's
answered my next question. I was going to ask, what was a young Sabby Gill like, a young 15-year-old? What were you like?
yeah. Look, before we were talking, one of the things I did was, I think I wasted my early years, right? Even when I was at boarding school, I probably indulged more than I should have done in the extracurricular activities, than spending as much time as I should have done on learning and development and school homework and all of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was probably a bit rebellious from my parents, especially going to boarding school and that sort of stuff, which, outside out of mind is probably the way I looked at it. But
Did you listen to rebellious music?
did I? Yeah, it was probably more R&B, early days of R&B when I was back then.
Well, okay, when you say early days R&B, do you mean like Destiny's Child, or are you talking a bit before that? Because
Before that, it was
okay,
Chaka Khan days
Chaka
when,
Khan.
and she's still around nowadays. But when my kids see me having that music blaring out my car and just look at me like, as if I'm from a different planet more than anything else.
Yeah, but what goes around comes around. Because I remember thinking the same thing of my parents and their music, and then yeah, one day someone's calling you uncle, and you're like, oh, I'm old now.
Yeah,
In
that's
fact,
that's always going to be there, unfortunately.
I do have an old man test. It's the Dale Rodriguez patent pending old man test. Would you like to take the test? It's 3 questions.
Go on then.
Do you have a bad back?
I do.
Okay, 1 out of 3. Do you have any other bad joints, like a knee or injury that recurring?
Yeah, right knee.
Does it ache for no reason?
Yes, normally when I'm sitting around for too long.
There you go. And the third one is the nail in the coffin. Are you old enough to be my dad?
Then I'd have to give away, either you'd have to give away your age, or I'd have to give away mine. So the chances are more than likely.
I mean, both of our ages are on company's house. I'm 36, so
Yes, I'm definitely old enough to be your father.
Fun times. 3 for 3. There we go.
And a father at legal that would have been there at legal age as well.
Yeah. I've realised that I have to live by the sword, die by the sword. I'm now old enough to fit into that category. There are people in my workplace who are like that 18, 19 years difference to me. I'm like, oh, I'm now officially old man, and I hurt my back recently, so yeah, I'm getting there.
Cool.
All right, I've got to ask you some serious questions because
Yeah.
this is a LinkedIn type dealie. In your tenure as CEO of Dext, there's been a lot of change. What was the driver behind those changes? Do you want me to mention specifics, or just kind of leave it as a?
Yeah, no, you can enter specifics and then we can get real down to detail.
Okay, so there was a lot of price changes.
Yeah.
There's been significant product updates,
Yeah.
and there's been something that I've noticed in the industry, a lot of kind of consolidating of features, so bundling of features. Is that something that's been driven by you, or like the board, or like why so many changes so quickly?
Yeah, let's take pricing as being the very first one, right? And it was probably the most fundamental. It's the biggest change the organization has ever undertaken since the company was founded, right? And it all stems back to this whole concept around startup, scale up, growth, right? The journey that every single company goes through. When you think about a startup phase, right, of any organization, that's very much where you are very much laying the foundations for product, beta releases, MVP, just really trying to land those first few customers and making sure the value proposition sort of lands from a product perspective. And then then you want to get up into scale up. So you've proven out the technology, you've proven out the product, you're sort of hitting the business case and the value prop that you thought. Then it's really about, how do I scale this business and land as many clients and customers as possible? And that was the phase I would say the business was in when I started. And the business had done a really good job, right, landing as many partners and clients as it possibly could. We had close to 800 to 900,000 clients on Dext. The challenge was during a scale up phase, you tend to do what's a land grab, right? Try and get as many clients and customers as you can. The best way of doing that is almost like charging them nothing, right? And that was the model that we had. We had an unlimited pricing model where a partner only had to pay one amount of money, and then they had unlimited usage of their client base, right? And that was the top tier of program that we had. So if you were a partner and you had maybe 50 clients, and you were going to be still growing and wanted to roll that out, it was almost easier going to an unlimited package. You paid one price and then you had it for everyone. The challenge with that is you cannot grow your business in an unlimited model, right? So when I came on board and I sort of did my assessment, there were three things that really came to mind. One was the product, commercial, go-to-market, and that was number one. There was no way that this business was ever going to get to that next stage of growth if we didn't at least monetize our install base. And all I was asking was, if you use the product, you pay for the product, right? That's all it was get value out of the usage. So if I'm going to make all of these investments in the product, build it out, and you're using it, then you should pay for it. We had clients paying for the product in the unlimited usage that never even logged in, right? That we were still counting as potential clients because they had access to the product, but they weren't using it. So that was the reason why, Dale, we had to go through pricing and packaging. We had to go through a model where we moved everybody to a paid per client model, right? And it was a simple model that just said, again, if you use the product for extraction and our base Dext Prepare product, if you use it, pay for it. That's all I'm asking for. And that was really what the big difference was. And now, look, when we implemented it, and look, lessons learned, we could have done a far better job of the way that we communicated it.
You could have done it worse. You could have done it worse. So if you are suppliers, you've done a terrible job. But when it came out, I found it really funny how outraged some people were, because they were complaining that their fees would go up by tenfold, but then they were on a legacy agreement from 8-9 years ago that was you're now 1,000 clients on there for £200 a month. And the irony of that is, in the time I've been in this industry since 2018, we've seen this whole change on value-based pricing and accountants showing their worth, explaining their worth, and then the same said accountants and bookkeepers are complaining that Dext were increasing their fees. I was like, no, they're just changing it to in line what it should be. You've had a great deal for the last 10 years. You've had a ridiculous deal.
And that is, whenever I spoke to, and I was involved in a number of escalations, it wasn't until you start then looking and explaining to people exactly that claim, which is you've got a license here, you've had unlimited. If I actually look at your payment and the number of people, you had 50 clients that were using it at this level every single month through the ROI, return on investment. If I just sort of say, look, this is how much you're probably billing them, this is probably how much you're getting, this is how much ROI you're probably getting on the product, they sort of look at it and say, yeah, that's fair, but it's just, I'm just not happy. It's like, well, would you have ever been happy with anything I'd rolled out? And they said, probably not. So that was the reason why we did the change, right? Just going back to that. Now, look, we could have done a far better job of communicating it. The value that you'll see the difference being also, and this goes back to the second part of your question, which is around product innovation, bundling, and everything else. But we had 3 products we had Dext Prepare, Dext Precision, Dext Commerce. The challenge is that there were 3 separate products, but there is value in all 3 products, be it to a bookkeeper, to a client, to an end user, right? The insights that we give through Precision and all the commerce transactions that feed through like any other invoice or receipt. So there was definitely a link between the 3, but we never exploited that. So the recent unification that we've been through, bringing 3 products onto a single platform, was one of the key drivers of just making sure that we've got full use of our platform, and that was the bundling that we've done. But the other major driver over the last 2 years since I've been here has just been we've probably doubled down and tripled down on the amount of product innovation that we've driven and put into the product, right? That to me is something that we will never ever compromise on, right?
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
all about driving.
from a customer's perspective, there seems
Yeah,
to be a lot of change happening in general. Like I
yeah.
said, the consolidation. From your perspective, what do you think is driving that?
Well, look, we are one key driver, right? Where we absolutely believe that, look, it's almost impossible to continue to maintain three different distinct platforms. You've got to find some element of unification
Mhm.
between the three. The other thing also is that, when we talk to clients and talk to customers, we think about the end-to-end journey, right? The entire process flow, what you're trying to do. We're not just trying to be a point solution. We're trying to make sure that all of the different components across your end-to-end workflows and process flows. When you think about accounts payable, right? Accounts payable isn't just an invoice. It's accounts payable, it's receipts, it's invoicing, it's matching, it's payments, it's that entire process. So for us, owning one component of it, we want to make sure that we may only own one, but we manage the entire flow. So that's what I believe is driving a lot of it. Nobody wants 17 different systems. They want one
True.
continuous flow, one continuous view. They want it to be seamless. They want it to be as automated as possible. So that's very much what, when we talk about in effortless, make accounting effortless, that's really what we're talking about, is that as an accountant or a bookkeeper, we want to just make your job as easy as possible. Take away all of the mundane tasks that you perform and allow you to elevate yourself to a different discussion, a different conversation, a different billing element that you can do, different element of value that you bring to your clients, and everything that you need, whether that's data, health, insights, categorization, extraction, all of the different components. It doesn't matter to you how it gets done as long as it gets done, right? And it's all about outcomes. And people measure too much of inputs, but never the outputs and the outcomes. And that's very much what we are focused on. And that's what value-based pricing, that's what value, that's what ROI, that's what total cost of ownership, call it what you like. That's really what you're doing, is that you're measuring outcomes and the outcome, the value of that outcome to the client.
That was an amazing sales pitch.
Thank you. It wasn't supposed to be, but I should have
recorded.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I have to throw in a semi silly question now. What is your favorite thing, and what is your least favorite thing about your position at Dext?
Look, the least favorite thing is when I don't spend enough time with customers, right, and partners. And for me, sometimes, as a CEO, you do get involved in a lot of internal stuff, right? And you reporting, discussions, conversations, and that sort of stuff. That's probably the area of the job that I probably, I'm okay with. But for me, the bit I love, right, is just getting out to see clients, getting out to see partners, having these sort of discussions, having open and frank conversations. Because it's when I end up having those conversations, I learn a lot more that makes me a better person to be able to come back to people and say, well, actually, I'm not sure what we were thinking about, or actually what we've got on our product roadmap is the right thing. Because I spoke to 5 clients last week and I pitched it to them, and they actually came back and sort of said X, Y, and Z, right? I mean, I'm on every single advisory board that we have. I get involved in every single one of those discussions and conversations. We do our global partner update, which Stephen and I, our Chief Product Technology Officer, we do personally because we feel it's so important. We have Q&A, we have constant engagement. But for me, that's the bit I love most, right? Is just having these types of conversations and learning, right? For me, I'm on a continuous learning path. I learn something new every time I engage with a client. I don't necessarily have that ability to learn as much when I'm doing the same stuff all the time internally.
Okay. And again, the opposite end of that question, what's your least favorite thing?
Yeah, least favorite thing, is probably that internal stuff, right? It's just having to constantly
dealing with people. People are the worst.
Well,
in your mouth. Yeah,
not my people, right? But of course, it's just dealing with. I hate bureaucracy. I hate dealing with too much of the same old stuff, right? It is that constant learning. If I'm not learning, that's the bit I hate, right? When it just becomes a bit like what we offer, right? Bookkeeping. I hate that mundane task element of my job, right? Yep. Whereas, you know what, I find, and I am constantly looking for better ways of doing it, right? I'm using more AI in my everyday tasks, right? Getting summaries, getting information, getting data. anything that makes me a lot more productive, right? And allows me to have proper informed discussions. It gives me more customer face time or more employee time. I've just spent this morning, sitting with the UK team talking about what should our campaign calendars look like, right? Well, how should we go out to market? What should we do? All of those types of things. Those are great conversations. I'm learning so much about, well, actually, Sabby, that's a great idea, but these are the reasons why we wouldn't do that. Actually, you know what? I hadn't thought about it. You give me a different perspective. That makes me a far better leader by constantly being on that learning journey.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, that's a very good answer. Is Sabby short for something?
It is, actually. So my real name is Sarbjit, which is spelled Sarbjit. So, and you'll probably meet a lot of people who are Sikh, and normally you'll see a lot of people who've got certain endings at the bottom end of their names. So Jit is a very common name. So you'll hear Sarbjit, Inderjit, Chanjit. You'll hear all of these Indians, and that's one way of recognizing they're Sikh. So yeah, look, it's again, it's the reason why I came up with Sabby, and that's always years ago when it was my first ever job, when I kept on telling people what my name was. I had some probably, today you probably call them ignorant individuals and people who sort of turned around and said, you know what, that's too difficult. That's too difficult. You know what, we're going to call you, we're going to call you
Steve. Yeah.
We'll call you Steve, or, well, there was already a Steve Gill in the company. So it's like, we'll come up with another name. There was like Sabby. It was like, and do you know what? It stuck ever since. Even my parents started calling me that.
That's going to lead to my next question. Like, are you ever called your proper name? And if so, when?
Yeah, I was only ever called my proper name when I was in trouble. Right? Normally by my mum or dad. But yeah, no, very rarely. It's normally, maybe at check-in or passport control or wherever somebody's got a document. That's when they'll call it. But interestingly enough, people will always still turn around and say, would you rather be preferred to be called something else? Which I never sort of ever understood why people would say that until you probably see a name that's really hard to introduce, right? And I think everybody shortens nowadays.
Yep. Okay, so you only get called your full name when you're in trouble.
Yes.
Does that happen often?
Not anymore. Not as much as not as much as it used to.
Back in the day when you were wasting your youth.
Back in the day.
All right, obviously, I don't want you to incriminate yourself, but like, what kind of mischief were you getting up to? Like, were you skipping school?
No,
poker? Like, what were you doing that was so mischievous?
Yeah, no, it's probably being at boarding school. When you're supposed to potentially be prepping or any of that type of stuff. The nearest pub was like about 3 minutes down the road, and there used to be another one about 5 minutes down the road. So, depending on what time of evening it was, and depending on how much work everybody had, there's always 2 or 3 people who would at that moment in time. Phones weren't as widely introduced, so it wasn't a case of, look, 2 minutes, meet here. It used to be that quick knock on the door, 2 knocks, we're at pub number 1, 3 knocks, pub number 2, right? And it always used to be at 9:15, so we always knew the time. It was just a case of we didn't know where. So I probably spent a bit more time than I should have done in those sort of establishments.
So what was your drink of choice back in the day, and does it differ now?
Actually, back in the day it was cider, and now I couldn't go anywhere near it.
Okay, what's the drink of choice now?
Drink of choice is probably Doom Bar if I'm drinking bitter.
Yep.
Or it would be nice summer's day. This is probably gin and tonic, and it's probably Monkey 47 gin.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really like Roku gin. It's one of my favorites.
Do you know what? There's just too much choice, right? It took me a long time to even sort of get down to Monkey 47, but that's probably my drink of choice now.
Cool. I also recommend Plymouth gin. It's an old school, just good ginny flavor, if that makes sense. So I personally don't like flavored gins, so I like standard gin.
Totally. Yeah, Plymouth used to be the ones that, especially when you're doing cocktails or martinis or anything like that, right? Or gin with vermouth and that sort of stuff. That was always the one that we would use, Plymouth. I used to own a bar and restaurant many years ago.
You ran a bar and restaurant many years ago?
Well,
bar/restaurant. Where was it?
It was a bar slash restaurant, and actually it used to be a jazz club in Reading.
Really?
And because I used to many years ago, I used to play the double bass, and we used to have jam sessions on a Sunday.
One of the
Uh,
coolest instruments of all time.
it, you
It's in
know,
my top three. Cello's my favorite instrument, but double bass. That's it.
yeah, it used to be great, right? We had me and my brother opened it. I very much loved that, that entire experience. And we had it for about 4 years, and then I had to give it up mainly because I moved to the gaming industry, and in the gaming industry where I was selling slot machines,
Hmm.
um, didn't, and then I was on the UK Gaming Commission, didn't allow me to have other interests outside,
Really?
could be seen as money laundering.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that at all. That's really interesting. So what you had to give up like the musical side because it was
Yeah, well, I had to give up the directorship and the ownership of the bar, so my
oh
brother
wow.
sort of took that on. And then in the gaming industry, I was responsible for selling slot machines, everything outside of the Americas. So
Hmm.
then I was constantly on the road. I used to go to Macau, go to Singapore, Australia,
How did you
South
switch from
Africa.
that to that? Like, were you applying for jobs, or did someone come into your establishment and go, how did it work? What did that
Yeah, no,
cross over to
it
change?
was exactly that. It was somebody came in and just sort of, yeah, headhunter sort of approached me, and it was a most bizarre conversation when they sort of said, "Look, how would you like to work for the number one company that does this, right?" Without mentioning it was a game, and I said, "Look, I know this industry extremely well.
Hmm.
I can't so it's either got to be a different industry,
Yeah.
right? It can't be a UK-based company, etc." And they said, "You're absolutely right. It's a gaming company based out of Las Vegas, selling slot machines." Um, and it was like, okay, why me? And that's when they turned around and said, "Well, actually, they're going through a massive transformation
Hmm.
around digitizing, around automation, around client server, trying to introduce online gaming." So the principles were very much the same of everything that I'd been through. And at that moment in time, I was working for HP Software, where I was running the European software business. It was the
Well,
same
to
principles,
go back to
but
that, you're working for HP and you owned your own business at the same time.
yeah, correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But it only used to open on it 2 or 3 days a week, and my brother did most of it. I probably, again, probably exploited more than I should have done behind the bar and drinking and all of that stuff. But it was a great time, great period.
And so, how old were you at this time?
Oh, I was probably around about 30. Yeah, probably about 30, yeah, late 30s.
Okay, so wait, did you have kids by then, or marrying kids, or not? Not
Nope,
just yet.
no, that was literally, it was almost at that moment in time that I met my wife. And then, yeah, everything changed for the better.
Where did you guys meet, by the way? That's a very personal question, but was it?
Actually, we met at PeopleSoft, which is one of the previous software companies that we used to work at, and then we'd sort of. I used to live abroad. I used to live in California and Silicon Valley. Used to come back on a
Mhm.
fairly regular basis. We'd probably be the last two at the end of each event, talking to each other in the bar
Hmm.
while everybody else had gone to sleep and everything. Lost a bit of touch, and then yeah, it sort of just reconnected, and everything fell into place.
That's fantastic. Of all the places you've lived slash worked, which one's been your favorite and why?
Probably the best were for me was Singapore, right?
Yeah.
Mainly because look, I love. I'm a bit of a food connoisseur. I love food, right? And I love
Hmm.
spicy. I really love Asian food. And when I used to live in Singapore, it used to be those places where you used to have, like there's a place there called Newton. If anybody goes to Singapore, go there. It's Newton Market. It's where
Hmm.
you have all of the hawker stands. So people literally making fresh food there and then outside on these outside grills. And they used to have, imagine, a bit like circling the wagons. You used to have all these wagons on the outside with all of these different hawker stands, tables in the middle, and runners, right? Little, um, young kids that would literally come up to you and say, "Right, mister, here's what would you like?" You then order. They would then run and get your food, bring it back, go and get you beer, bringing it back, and then constantly you just sat there. And then they
Wow.
would take the money and then go and distribute it across all of the right restaurants to make sure that they were then, so you never knew really where you were getting, you just turned around and said what you wanted. That was probably one of my best memories of ever having lived in Singapore.
That's amazing. I have no idea what Singaporean food is like, so yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, look, it's a cross between, you can get everything, right? French cuisine, Polynesian, and it's all got that hint of spice, right? Because of Singapore, Chinese, Thai, everything else. Big multicultural population. It's probably one of the most multicultural populations at that moment in time that I'd ever worked in, and I absolutely loved it. Right, just creamed it up.
So, as a foodie, do you also like to cook?
I do, but I'd love to do a lot more than I do at the moment, and my wife would like me to do a lot more than I do at the moment. But yeah, look, we probably spend more time going out, right, to restaurants and allowing everybody else to do it, because it's almost like, as much as I love cooking, right, it's probably the eating that I probably enjoy more than the actual physical cooking itself. So sometimes it's like I'd love to be able to do more.
Okay. Do you have like a signature dish that you're
my lasagna
famous for? Sorry, lasagna.
My lasagna is one to go for, right?
Okay.
But it doesn't help when your wife is gluten-free and your daughter is allergic to eggs. So when I end up making it, hence the reason why I don't make it much. And whenever I do, it's normally when we've got friends around, because then it's like, well, we've got friends coming, right? I'm going to do my signature dish. You guys can, have something else, or Deliveroo can do a quick delivery for you, because I'm taking over the entire kitchen. I do.
Oh yeah, okay. How long does it take for you to prepare your signature lasagna then?
Yeah, literally, it's an all-day event. Me mainly because it's like there's lots of things to cut up, there's lots of things to prepare. I'll normally prepare it in the morning and then put it in when people arrive. Last thing I hate doing is cooking while people are actually there, right? That's where you want to have conversations and that sort of stuff. So to me, it's do as much preparation as possible, and then later on just put the cheese over the top, straight in the oven, leave it for like close to an hour 20, and then we're done.
All right, then. What's the weirdest thing you've ever eaten?
I would say it was a live lobster.
Okay.
So
where, why, and when?
So it was a delicacy. It was in a casino restaurant in Portugal. Okay. We just signed a big deal, and they took us to one of their main art, probably their key artifact restaurant. But what it was is it was almost like sashimi lobster, right? So it was almost like fresh lobster. But what it was because it's all to do with temperature. So depending on, even though the lobster was all literally cut up and it was pretty much dead, because it was frozen and then it was thawed at room temperature, it was still moving at that moment in time.
And that was probably
sorry?
Is that a pleasant experience, having the food move in your mouth? Or?
Yeah, well, I can tell you one thing. The food was unbelievable, right? It was a delicacy. So what you're seeing is, you're not seeing the body or anything like that moves, or the bits you're eating, but it's all of the rest of the body, the legs, and all of those things that were moving. So that was probably the most bizarre thing. And then, of course, when you're in places like Singapore and those sort of things, I used to work in Saudi Arabia. I hate eating anything that's looking at me. So anything that's got eyes, right, like a goat's head or any of that stuff. And there's lots of those delicacy things that you see in places like Saudi Arabia. That's always a real challenge for me to be able to eat anything. So I constantly, if I'm in a restaurant, they say, "Hey, we can bring you out this fish." It's like, "Yeah, please cut the head off." Right? I don't want to see any of that. So you see those sort of things, but yeah, I wouldn't go anywhere near anything that looked at me.
Okay, so if something's got eyes on it, you're definitely not eating it. You can't eat it. That's your.
Yeah, it's like, take it away. I wouldn't even sit at the table with something like that.
Okay, all right, that's cool. That's good to know. I don't know if you guys will ever sit down for a meal, but if we do, I'll remember not to order a goat's head.
Yeah, thanks.
I say that like I've eaten goat's head. So casual. I don't think I've ever eaten goat's head. I've eaten goat, just not goat's head.
So what's the worst thing you've ever eaten?
The worst thing I've ever eaten? Mine's a really boring answer. I discovered that I have a mild allergy to cottage cheese about 4 or 5 years ago. I ate it because someone recommended it as a good protein source for after the gym, and I
Yeah.
just felt horrible. So the worst thing I've ever eaten is cottage cheese because I'm allergic to it. It gives me like a migraine. Yeah, or do you mean the weirdest thing I've ever eaten?
Yeah. Well, no, both, right?
Okay, weirdest thing. I have eaten bugs and I've eaten dog meat.
Dog meat.
Yes,
Now, let me ask on that one. A dog
the
meat
the meat
or
of the
dog
dog.
food?
I've eaten dog food too, but I've eaten the body,
So
like the
you're gonna
super
have to
flesh of a
explain.
dog.
You're gonna have to explain in what condition would anybody ever eat dog meat?
I didn't know it was dog.
Okay. Foreign country, I hope.
Hmm.
Care to
Yes.
elaborate?
Someone ordered it for me. Hey Dale, try this in Mandarin. I was like,
Okay.
cool. And I was like, tastes really nice. They're like, yeah, that's dog. And I was like, nah, don't be silly. And then because of where we were, they were like, let's go look in the kitchen real quick. We looked in the kitchen. I was like, oh, there's some in the fridge. Just, yeah.
Oh my God.
The weird thing is, though, I like the way it tastes. Like until he told me, I was like, this is tasty. So,
Yeah. No, I remember. Look, it was the first time I ever ate octopus. Right? It was
mm,
like, oh, there's no way I'm gonna eat. And then as soon as you eat it, it's almost like chewy ham, right? So it's like there's certain delicacies that you will eat that afterwards you sort of say, well, actually, it doesn't taste too bad.
yeah. I've got to ask you some business related
Yeah.
questions as well because we meandered. Um, Bundling. Okay, wait. I want to ask this in a really loaded way. Who threw the first stone, Approval Max or Dext? Because in my opinion, there's a lot of overlap between what they do, what you do, and them taking your ground and you're taking their ground. Who started
Yeah.
that?
Look, I would say that when Approval Max talked about doing extraction, right, and sort of moving into the accounts payable flow and everything else, right? Look, Approval Max is still a really good integrated partner for us, right? There's a lot of things that Approval Max do that actually still benefit us, right? Because they do PO approvals, they do a lot of approvals and complex rules and approvals, right?
Hmm.
Our approval process is very much around our process, right? We're not stepping into other areas. It's like, when you want to do expenses, you need that expenses flow. If you want to do receipt approval, especially if we're going into payments, we need that basic level of approval. So yes, we were offering approvals, but we weren't offering it to compete with Approval Max. We were just complementing our own product, and we're still tightly integrated with them. So yeah, look, it's I think you will always see this, right? People pushing the boundaries. The one thing that we will always concentrate on, and I'm a real strong believer, is that moving too far away from your core business, right?
Hmm.
So our core business around bookkeeping automation platform, you won't see us stream too much outside of that. It's all of the things associated with that. So when you think about people say, well, payments, that's a long way from extraction. Well, it's not, because it's really about paying those same invoices, receipts, and everything else. So we went into payments, commerce, hence the reason why we're able to take all of these and build them into our core. Our core value proposition is that accounting platform and the bookkeeping automation platform, and making bookkeepers as effective and efficient as possible. That's very much where we are spending our time and concentrating.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say Approval Max started it, but that's just my take.
Which I did, right? Going back to the extraction piece, right? Then we obviously sort of went into their space, right, with that basic level of approval.
Yep.
And look, they will continue, right? And I'm sure there will be other players who will continue to try and fall into our space. And look, I'm always up for good, healthy competition, right? It's when people are unhealthy, right? Or so you sort of fall into that category where people are not necessarily undermining, but they're really getting to a point where they give the industry or they give software a bad name. That's where I get irritated. I think it's probably the right
No,
word.
no, thank you for answering that question because I know it's a big one. I've noticed
Yeah.
you mentioned Dex getting into payments. There
Yeah.
seems to be a lot of payment providers coming out now. From your perspective, like, do you know why that is, or why there's been such a surge in it?
Yeah, look, the payments is, I would say, the one area that if you get into, it's quite lucrative, right? Because depending on who holds the money, you think about interchange, you think about credit cards, you think about number of providers, there's always that holding of money in those sort of things, right? That's one area. The other thing also is that, when you're with a certain payment provider, it's sometimes quite difficult to move away from them, right? Because last thing you ever want to do is screw up payments, especially when it comes to customers, clients, right? Accountants, payroll, any of those types of components. So to me, I think there's definitely an opportunity. And I don't think payments is something that anybody's got right? I think there's room for lots of players. If you look at all of them, Stripe, Go Cardless, right? You got different players. You got people like Monzo, you got people like Tide, you got all these people, Revolut, you got all these different players. Even credit card providers trying to be payment providers. You've got payment providers trying to now offer credit cards. You've got all these different players. All we're trying to do with our payment solution, right? And we're not building it ourselves. Like we will strongly partner with people and just make sure that we got the right solution for the client. But it should be seamless to the client or the accountant or the bookkeeper of trying to go out and try and find the right solution. It's like that, my process, my flow, I need to do pay invoices and pay receipts, and I've got to be able to pay, in our world, pay payroll, and I've got to be able to pay expenses. I just want the best solution that can do all of those different pieces. And for us, that's the reason why it goes back to our overall effortless accounting. We just want to automate and provide as much as we possibly can and provide you the right solution. You should not have to worry what the back end looks like. And I think too many people concentrate on what the back end looks like. And that's where the competition, I think, falls into. Hence the reason why you say there's so many providers.
There are. And I'm picking up on something you said. You said you don't think any provider's got it quite right just yet. I'm not going to ask you to name providers because that'll be rude and unhelpful. But so you mentioned they haven't quite got it right yet. What will the Dext payments part do differently to make it quote unquote right?
Yeah, look, again,
what gap will it fill?
Yeah, look, I think the piece for me is the fact that it's going to be fully integrated through the entire process from start to finish. If you think about what payment providers do today, payment sort of ends up being the final step in the process, right? I've done all these approvals, I've done all the checking, I've done everything. Now create a file, whether it's an ACH file or a CHAPS or whatever, send it to the bank or whether it's open banking, and now go make the payment. But when you've got payments fully integrated from when we extract the information, how do you go and do KYC, KYB? How do you go and make sure that you've got all of the payment information? What comes in? How do you stop fraudulent activity? How do you know where the bank details have been intercepted on the invoice? All of those. Making all of those checks all the way through against your payment system, against your supplier information, against all of the sort of certified suppliers, right? To me, makes a massive difference. I think also the other thing is when you think about approvals and thinking about all of these different data points that are coming in, you constantly have to validate everything, right? Against payments, when's the next payment run? How do you turn around to somebody and say, when am I going to get paid this invoice? Straight away, when the invoice is extracted, I can tell you, because I've got the entire flow, knowing when the next payment run, know when all these approvals are going to get through, and constantly keep that updated. That won't happen. If I fed that to a GL, then the GL fed a payment file. It's almost like I'm now disconnected from the GL. I'm now disconnected from the payment system because you're passing it to yet another system. They're now scheduling it. But if it's fully integrated end to end, I think that makes a massive difference. Just insights, knowing what the information is, knowing about credit. Do I have enough even funds to make that payment? Knowing all of that stuff up front when the invoice comes in. If I don't, going back to the client and being able to do that. The other thing also is that, and this is probably my biggest piece, is look, small business owners are the core, they're the backbone of the entire UK economy, right? They make up 96% of the overall economy. Paying small business owners as quickly and as fast as possible, right, is absolutely imperative, right? We can do that because now you can just have that button on the invoice that says pay now, right? And there's a lot of businesses, right? We're one of them, that if we're dealing with small business owners or we're dealing with organizations that, and I do this in my own personal life, is, if I'm dealing with a small business, it's like, you know what, just pay now, regardless of your payment terms, right? Because I know how important cash is to your business, to your flow and everything else. Having the ability to do that rather than waiting till the next payment run and everything else, but recording all of that information, I think really, anything you can do to support those small business owners is key, and that's really what we try and allow for.
Unfortunately, not everyone thinks like you, but you're right. The cash flow should be better. Okay, I'm going to ask you a mean question. You ready for a mean question? We're going to zoom in for this one. E-invoicing / PEPAL / cashless society. If those things come into play, is OCR still needed?
Yes, but in a totally different way. Right?
Please explain.
So let's take a perfect example, right? Even today, when we think of spend cards, right? Even spend cards to an extent, I paid for this receipt, I paid for this invoice, automatically go and expense it. When you are regulated and you have organizations like HMRC or the ATO or any of these organizations, they will always go back to the physical receipt or the physical invoice as for audit purposes, right? They still need to track that related information. You're still going to have line item extracted information. Right. So what will end up happening is that I think it's just a different way of capturing the same information. You're still going to have to categorize it. You're still going to need ways of capturing that information. It's just physically not coming through a physical receipt. It could be automated, right? Even today, the number of organizations, Apple's a perfect example. You go buy an Apple, anything you buy an Apple, they don't do physical receipts. But what's the first thing you do? You give them an email address, and then they email you the invoice, right? All we do is we just turn around and say, actually, and I was in the Apple store the other day, and then you just automatically, you can put in the sabby.gill plus expense.costs at dext.com, and guess what? Automatically goes into expenses and into my Dext environment. So that's, I think, what's going to end up happening is that information, unless you can help find a way of reducing regulatory and compliance requirements for keeping invoices and transactions for 7 years and those sort of things, you're still going to need some element of the invoice. It's just coming in a different way.
We can change it. Rodriguez for PM 2043. Do I have your vote?
You got my vote.
Fantastic. Pick up on something. Does that mean you're in the Apple store? Are you an Apple guy? Are you an Apple person? Do you got the Apple TV?
I am totally an Apple individual. I'm an Apple Mac, Apple iPad. So yeah, it's just I don't know. I've just been brought up that way, and I think that it was always probably more the rest of the family and the kids, right? Who when they were first born, it was so much easier just giving them an app or an iPad, right? With Peppa Pig on it and all the other programs that we know so well. Thomas the Tank Engine was my son's best one, but it was always easier, right, on an iPad. It was so much more easier to use. And Apple did a brilliant job just on the App Store, right, and the number of apps that they were available and the speed to market that they came up with. I'm not sure if I would ever move away from them, however much Samsung or any of these other iOS, Android sort of come to market. Now the great thing is, at Dext we do both, right? So it doesn't matter who you are, right? Whether you're an iOS or whether you're Android.
I love how you bring it back to the sales pitch. You're so good.
Of course.
Such a CEO. Such a CEO. Of course, at Dext we do both. Right. Internally, what do you guys use? Are you using Apple products for your internal emails and comms, or are you using Windows devices?
No. So we're 100% Apple, 100% cloud. Everything we do is it's Google, it's Slack, it's all using the latest tools. But we do have a development team though, who sort of switch between both, because even though we're on AWS, we still make sure that we work on Android. We still have some Linux machines. We still very much make sure that where required, we still have that level of support. But yeah, pretty much standard Apple at the moment.
Okay, fair play. Thank you for answering all my questions, by the way. I think we learned quite a bit about you. You're a bit mischievous back in the day, went to boarding school, squandered youth, you're a foodie, And the weirdest thing you ate was live lobster. Very important things.
Yeah. Well, no, look, it's been great. One of the great things about having these sort of conversations is half the things that you asked me, I completely forgot about. All right. So it's great to recall some of that stuff. And I'm due to go to Portugal during the summer. I'm wondering whether or not it might be an idea just to pop down and see if they still offer it.
I can only imagine they do. Okay, before we go though, two things.
Yeah.
One, do you have any questions for me? And two, is there like a nugget of wisdom or a bombshell you just want to finish on?
Yeah. Look, let's ask you the questions. So look, you've been doing this a very long time, right? In relation to the way that you've been doing these. So what's been your most memorable outside of this one? Because I won't ask you to include this particular session. What's been your most memorable interview, discussion, conversation, and why?
I've got three different reasons. One of my earlier ones with a guy called Nick Smethurst, he actually came up with a name for the show when I was doing it like more casually. So
Yeah.
that's a memorable one. There's an episode where I had Gareth Wax on. He's like a LinkedIn coach and a serial entrepreneur. He's got lots of businesses. And he was talking about a startup he was working with that deals with mushrooms, specifically the mycelial network, so the roots of the mushrooms. And I can't remember why, but there's a group of people watching it who just kept on making mushroom puns in the comments, and that became like a good 35 minutes, just pure laughter. Gareth being a good sport, kind of talking about his business, but just the amount of mushroom puns on that conversation was ridiculous. And then the third one, I had Eamon Cowrie on, former EMEA for Zero, and he gave some really great. There's some young watchers on, and he gave some really great career advice on like defining your career and just taking hold of it, and don't just assume just because you're good at your job you'll get the promotion that you want. And he gave some really good insights, like 3 or 4 good key points that I liked, that a lot of people in the audience liked, about moving your career in the direction you want. So those are the 3 that stick into my head.
Brilliant. Look, if there's any way you can send the link out for those 3, I'd love to go back and have a look.
Yeah, I'll send them to you in the DMs. That's cool.
Look, the one area nugget that I would leave is, look, it's a very complex environment that we all work in, right? And it's also important that everybody thinks about technology, right? And the way that you think about transformation, change, and everything else. The one area that a lot of people forget about is what I refer to as the human factor and the change management element of anything that you end up doing. And to me, that's, as much as I would love for you to go out and become a Dext organization wall to wall, the thing I would always say to you is, don't forget the human element and the change, because a lot of people always talk about, will AI take my job away? Will AI do this? The change of putting in software and the transformation change, yes, it's going to should make you more effective, should make you more efficient. But the way that you try and persuade people to adopt this stuff is hard, right? And we find that. But just making sure that people understand the value, making sure you understand the change management, how you transform, and those sort of pieces, to me, is the one area that I think a lot of people forget about. So don't forget that human element around change management.